Hi, folks. You with Tacitus today. Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this radio audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the phenomenon of that's really starting to be more prevalent, which is okay. So we fabricated this from the media. So we fabricated a story. So we told lies. So we invented things. So the whole thing's made up. It doesn't matter because you know what? We're giving a voice to the oppressed, and in the darkest possible imaginings of what could happen, might happen to the oppressed, then we can invent these fantastic stories because it gives voice to the oppressed. It represents ideologically the oppression that they suffer. Sure, it's not factual. Sure, we made it up, because that doesn't matter. We give a voice to the oppressed. Now, I've noticed that the primary perpetrators of this are typically, not always, but typically Jewish, particularly Jewish lesbians and homosexuals do this. But it's not exclusively that. You get black activists, the Jussie Smollett type thing, doing it as well. And because people who are doing it are supposedly oppressed minorities, it's kind of acceptable because even though they're fabricated the whole thing, it's possible that the people who, the oppressed people may or could or might suffer this sort of privation. Therefore, they're speaking symbolically as a parable or something like that. They're not really sort of saying that it's real. They're just saying this is the sort of things that they in their darkest dreams that they fear. Not that it ever happened or ever will happen, but they kind of imagine they could happen because that makes them more of a victim. Now, in the propaganda wars that sort of go on, it's not really much for war. The propaganda seems to come pretty much just from one side. It's the Jussie Smollett type propaganda is everywhere. And whenever you see a swastika being spray painted on something, it's somebody trying to invent and fabricate an incident. But let's have a look at this. There was I won't sort of specifically mention the event, but there was a number of media articles reported by one of the world's most prominent media outlets, or a number of them actually, not just one, where it was claimed babies, little babies, and the language was as emotive and inflammatory as you can. Little tiny little babies, little girls dressed in pink. Have we got a photograph of a little girl dressed in pink? One crying? No, worse than that. Oh, no, maybe not going as far as the beheading here. Just a little girl in pink crying. Yeah, that's it. Use that photograph. So it's ginned up to little babies, tiny little defenseless little babies being beheaded. The outrage of it. So little babies being beheaded. Or how about this one? Innocent mother, expectant mothers. Don't use the word woman, use the word mother. We want to gin up the emotion here. Having their belly ripped open, and the little baby ripped out from her womb. And then these people with evil fangs, they ate the baby. So real ginned up sort of, well, not eating the baby or the fangs, but this sort of stuff was reported as having happened. So clearly this is outrageous, and if these things happen, then all good sense and all sort of balance goes out the window, because anyone that does that sort of thing, no punishment is too extreme, no response is too extreme when faced with that sort of evil. Because when you're that evil, then you don't have legal rights or anything, and brutal responses are required because of that sort of behaviour. Now, this has been a propaganda sort of tool for a long time. The Nazis, for example, when just shortly before the invasion of Poland, had a propaganda thing doing the rounds. And by the way, the Nazis are hardly unique in this. The Russians and the Chinese communists, Pol Pot, they all used the most outrageous and insane propaganda the Nazis just had better production values. So little blonde girl in a white dress, skipping idyllically alongside a little stream, open meadows, little lambs and all this sort of thing, and then a crazed, brutish, insane sort of person, guy who's going around, clearly Polish, and then he spies the little, creeps up on her like a jungle animal, because the innocence, the personification of innocence, little girl. And then the next scene is the little girl's dead, and the arranging of the clothes, even though it's not directly stated, the arranging of the clothes suggests that the most improper act has taken place, as well as the murder. So clearly, these people don't. What sort of legal rights do these people deserve? They've crossed the boundary. Only a total response is required here to bring such evil to justice. And so this is a common thing. Now, this was again a major media outlet. Now they sort of danced around the directness of the issue, saying that they interviewed witnesses and people who'd seen these things and so on, and they'd gone to academics who'd say, yes, this is definitely the sort of thing that goes on. So they sort of rounded it out with that. But it was quite confronting to read something like this or to see it online. The problem is these things never happened, and they were a pure invention with the intention of creating an inflammatory situation, so that in the midst of the emotive outrage, people would agree with over-the-top responses. Look what they've done. You're quibbling about legal rights. You talk about legal rights to the mother of the beheaded little babies. Are you fucking nuts? So this was the purpose. Now we see this going on a lot, and I'll come back to some other instances in a minute. But when the journalists, or there was a few journalists, were cornered by this, one was cornered by it, and he, by the way, appears to have zero conscience on the issue. And he says, well, look, okay, so there's a few facts that aren't there, but in the end, what we're doing, I don't care about. He says, I don't care about the facts. I don't care about the reality. I don't care about whether it's true or not. What I care about, he says, with a degree of righteousness that you think would be inappropriate given the lies he's been telling. What I care about, he says, is giving voice to the oppressed. Now, who are the oppressed exactly? How do you determine the oppressed? I mean, that's an ideological sort of determination rather than an actual one. So, but nonetheless, that's his view. We're here to give voice to the oppressed. So if we exaggerate, if we symbolically say that this or that happened, then what we're doing is saying, because they're an oppressed class, this is the sort of thing that could happen, that might happen, and therefore we're allowed to say that because it illustrates, in an ideological sense, it illustrates the level of oppression that this group, we say, ideologically, that we say the level of oppression that they suffer. So a fuckload of ideology and very few facts, which, by the way, sums up pretty much the whole propaganda, the race, gender, LGBTQ propaganda machine these days. Very skinny on facts, very large on ideology, and very large on lies and made up stories of oppression. Now, there have been some other instances where again, when the journalists are sort of caught out for this, they, I'm just giving voice to the oppressed. Well, these things could happen. I've heard somewhere that it might have happened. Now, this was a game some years ago. I remember many years ago, 30 plus years ago now, when there was a lot of anti-male propaganda doing the rounds that all men, this is when they were ginning up the divorce things in all across the West, where all men were violent, wife-beating pedophiles, for example. And And there was one article I read where the academics said that in a supposed study that 50% of men are 50% of fathers with daughters are pedophiles. They're all screwing their underage daughters, and this is starting at an age of 3 or 4 years old. 50%. And of course, this is just beyond ridiculous, astonishing. But no one was pushing back on it. No politician was getting up and saying this is terrible. In fact, there were a number of politicians that were rushing to get in front of the microphone, saying how they were going to propose tough legislation on all these pedophiles. But the pedophiles that existed, or they said it, were all sort of straight white males in nuclear families. At the same time as they're targeting the nuclear family for destruction. So there's clearly no coincidence there. So anyway, I was talking, I managed to get, well, it wasn't hard, her name was on it, the academic. She's a lesbian gender studies academic and very much for sale, and that was obvious. And so I tried, there's no raw data as to where she got this 50% from. So I tried to sort of coax it out of her, and in the end, she said, "Oh, look, I heard it somewhere. I can't remember where." That was it. So this was the basis of this 50% of men are pedophiles screwing their own daughters in the nuclear family. Was that she'd heard it somewhere but couldn't remember where. Yet it was cited in a supposed academic research paper, and then put out into the media uncritically. No one's questioning it. No one's pushing back. So the media is obviously very much in partnership with this desire to eradicate the nuclear family. And the journalists, by the way, there's plenty of straight white males among the journalists, so they're being told to do it, and they're doing it. Now, I got hold of one of the journalists who agreed to have a cup of coffee with me, and he said, "Look, we've been told to do it. Do we agree with it? No. Do we think it's true? No. But we've been told by the management, the senior editors, that's the story we're going to run with. That's the angle we're going to run with. And if anybody doesn't like it, there's the door." So these aren't people that can easily get jobs somewhere else. So they've got to just go, okay, well, if that's what you want, that's what we'll do. So everyone was on board with the problem, but the senior management of the media outlet, in this instance, the newspaper, were also co-opted into so you've got the political class, the academic class, and the media class, even 30 odd years ago, were being co-opted into this desperate attack. It's an insane attack on the nuclear family, particularly men. The reason the nuclear family is because of those fucking men, those fucking straight white men. They're all damn Nazis, and they're pedophiling all their daughters, 50% of them. Fuck. Now, this was also brought into the schools because schools counsellors and all these sort of people, teachers, were then dragged off to courses, all paid for by the taxpayer and the trade unions, the NGOs, all this sort of thing, even back then. And the teachers were, did you know that 50% of men are pedophiles, screwing their daughters? So daughters are being harassed at school to say, so is your dad a pedophile? You can tell me. Just whisper quietly in my ear. And the burden of proof required was minimal. So if daughter has an argument with the father over, I don't know, her weekly allowance, or at 14, she wants to go night clubbing and dad says no. All she has to do is say, look, he's a pedophile. And straight away, she's allowed to go into some sort of protective, house and protective custody. She gets her own room, her own, she's gets free food, free accommodation, free everything. And, in the mind of a lot of young girls, that'll teach my dad to fucking tell me what to do if I want to go night clubbing at 14, And so, but the burden of proof is zero. The 14-year-old girl needs to say that it's happening or allege it, and that's it. So suddenly, all these government benefits and resources are available to her if she makes such a claim. So this then has a knock-on effect and causes many problems that didn't exist previously, which all these lies and untruths do. So having a look at this, and this, by the way, this professor was, who I pinned down further. I heard it somewhere, and she said, "Well, I don't know why you're bothering." This is words to the effect: "I don't know why you're bothering with whether it's true or not. We all know that the nuclear family is evil and all straight white men are Nazis. So who cares if I'm telling lies or untruths or making things up? That in the overall ideology of things, it's right, and it'll bring about social change, which we must have, because we all know the nuclear family is evil, and we don't need the details. So if I make something up about it, then I'm performing a service for the ideology, and who gives a fuck about the facts? Now, this is still a prevalent attitude, and we need to understand that when Jussie Smollett says, I was beaten up by MAGA guys or something, and all these sorts of things, as far as they're concerned, they're telling these lies in service of the ideology. Now, if we look at going back in time, there are some classes of people, the Jews, for example, who sort of believe that they have a unique form of victimhood, and whether they are being victimized today or whatever, and they've all over Europe and certainly everywhere where I've been, they're extremely diligent and conscientious in cataloguing what they see as the hurts, the slights, the insults, or the outright illegalities committed against them. And they take a long sort of historical view of victimhood and believe that they have a special place in the annals of victimhood. Now, there may be, as they would see it, there may be times, years, decades even, where they don't suffer any victimhood at all. But there is a need, as they perceive it, to keep that remembrance of victimhood alive and to keep it fresh and raw at all times. And so there must be a constant stream of propaganda being put out, be it factual or not, be it historically accurate or not, who cares? But the need to keep this sense of victimhood fresh and raw by a constant propaganda thing. The enemy, of course, as in wide historical terms, are Anglo-Saxon Christians. And so it's an interesting sort of development that, given they've managed to instill that structure of who's evil and who's good and who's the oppressor, who's not. They've managed very successfully, by the way, to, especially since the 1930s and 40s, instill this idea of oppressor, oppressed, victimhood, oppressed, that sort of stuff, which it's not simply Marxist, but it's a very Jewish perspective on the world. And now, and find that was turned against them in the recent Middle East fracas, because they're only, the activists are just using that same structure. Well, you're white and have social power. They're brown and have less social power. This means you're the Nazis. I mean, it's a very simplistic thing. but they've now found that simplistic paradigm, which they used to huge effect, is now, has been turned against them in that instance, and are outraged. Hold on, that's a device we're using to shame and guilt them. We don't want to use it against us. It's an interesting sort of thing. But I've noticed that the people who say we're just giving voice to the oppressed, they're not Christian Gentiles, or very few of them. You've been Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.